Hello everyone, Alan Sens here, and welcome to this segment on nuclear testing overview. I'm not going to repeat everything that's on the CTBTO website, which is part of the reading, but what I am going to do is highlight a few things for you and pick up on a few more points. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so here's our learning objectives for this segment. By the time we're done, you should be able to describe the scale and scope of nuclear weapons testing from 1945 to today. Now, right off the bat, we've got a little bit of a counting issue here. How do you actually count nuclear tests? Do you count the actual explosions or the test attempts? Because after all, a test might fail, and therefore there will be no explosion. In other cases, some tests aren't meant to explode. They're what are known as subcritical tests. So that means some data sets differ. So if you go on the internet, for example, and you start Googling number of tests, you'll get different numbers from a lot of those sources. And that's because they're using different counting methods to determine the number of tests or number of explosions. So what we're going to do in this course is we're going to use the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization data and just stick with it. And if we use different data, we'll let you know. I think that's probably the best way to do it. So here, for me, are what the key points are, the sort of the highlights, or I guess the lowlights, depending on your point of view. Between 1945 and 1996, there were approximately 2,050 nuclear explosions detonated around the world. Since 1996, there have been 7 explosions. Of the tests conducted between 1945 and 1996, about 500 of them, a quarter, were detonated in the atmosphere. On average, between 1945 and 1996, there was 1 nuclear test every 9 days for 5 decades, which when you think about it, it's kind of remarkable. From 1955 to 1989, the average number of nuclear tests conducted every year was 55. And the peak here is really quite remarkable, actually. It's shocking. When I first came across this number, I certainly was shocked. In 1962, there were 178 tests, 96 conducted by the United States and 79 by the Soviet Union. And of course, the largest nuclear weapon ever tested was the Soviet Tsar Bomba test at Novaya Zemlya, which is an island in the Soviet Arctic, now the Russian Arctic, on October 30th, 1961. And that had the largest yield yet seen, between 50 to 58 megatons. And that in of itself is a statement that the margin of error is 8 megatons. Really gives you an idea of how massive that explosion was. Between 1945 and 2013, over 60 different locations were used as test sites for nuclear explosions. So this has very much been a global activity. Here's the record. A couple of things maybe that are notable. So here we have the country on the left and the date of the first test, date of last test, and the number of tests total by country. And just a few things. We know, of course, United States Trinity, 1945, right? 1949 for the Soviet test. And you can see the other countries acquiring nuclear weapons and testing them. 1952, France, 1960, 64 for China. India tested its first nuclear device in 1974. They actually called it a peaceful nuclear device. I'm not sure anyone was fooled by that, but that's what they called it. And then India tested again in 1998, twice. Those tests, of course, spurned the Pakistani tests, 2 of them in 1998. Then we have North Korea, with its 3 tests to date: 2006, 2009, and 2013. Now, these 2 cases are interesting. Israel and South Africa may have tested a weapon in 1979, and there's some debate about that. There's some uncertainty, and I'll talk about that later in this segment. So this is our record overall, and if you look at the number of tests, we can see that the overwhelming majority of those tests were conducted by the United States and the Soviet Union, although France did conduct 210 tests of its own. Okay, so where can you test? Well, the answer is pretty much anywhere. We have atmospheric tests, which can be detonated like Trinity was on the top of a tower of some kind, or dropped from an aircraft like the Tsar Bomba was. You can test underground. You can test in the high atmosphere, fire from a missile, for example, and you can test underwater. So these are the 4 main environments or test forms that can take place. Now, here I have to qualify. This chart uses a different data set than the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization data set. The reason I'm using it is the graph actually just shows up better on these slides. The CTBTO charts, they're good, it's good data, but visually they don't show up very well. So I'm just going to use this one. It's close enough, but I just want to highlight a few things. So we can see this is by year, so here we have the dates down at the bottom. If you're struggling a little bit to read it, number of tests is this axis. And we can see how things kind of evolve as the Cold War goes along. Here's 1962, the crazy year, right, down there. So we see how many of the tests during this period, 1945 to 2013, were conducted by the United States in light blue and the Soviet Union in red. You can see some of the other tests. France in green, quite an extensive testing record. People's Republic of China in the dark blue. You can see the United Kingdom, some of its early tests in particular are here. India shows up for the first time in 1974. Where is it? There we are, and there's India right in there. Oh, no, sorry, right up there. And then we have the Pakistani tests, along with the Indian tests in 1998, and then we have the 3 North Korean tests, which is the most recent test then being in 2013. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the pattern over time of the testing record. Now, what that last slide did not show, and this slide does show, is the timeline with respect to atmospheric nuclear testing and underground nuclear testing in the 1945 to 2013 period. So now, unfortunately, we've got to flip data sets a little bit. This is from the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization. And what this chart then shows is the atmospheric tests here. And then after the Partial Test Ban Treaty, which we'll talk about later in the course, was signed in 1963, the signatories to that treaty started to test mostly underground. So these are all the underground tests here. You can see some countries that didn't come into the Partial Test Ban Treaty right away continue to test above ground, and that's that right there. So that's basically France and China. Now, the maybe test is kind of interesting. This is still a matter of some dispute, but the basic argument is that over the South Atlantic in 1979, specifically on September 22nd, there was a mysterious double flash of light over the South Atlantic. And this is referred to as the Vela Incident or the South Atlantic Flash. The reason it's called the Vela Incident is that this double flash was detected by an American satellite, and that satellite was called the Vela Hotel, and hence then the Vela Incident. So the incident took place off the Prince Edward Islands off Antarctica. Please don't confuse that with Prince Edward Island in Canada, but Prince Edward Islands off Antarctica. And the most widespread theory is that this double flash resulted from a joint South African and Israeli nuclear test. The reality is we just don't know. Was this flash a nuclear test by those two countries? And there are those that make the argument that no, it was caused by an electronic signal generated by an aging satellite. Some say it was a meteorite strike, a lightning bolt. Others suggest a meteoroid, a small one, hit the Vela satellite and caused this signal. There was no independent corroboration of an explosion, but nevertheless, examiners of the data, which include the Defense Intelligence Agency in the United States and the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory, a number of defense contractors, a number of academics and reporters, all their work has come to the conclusion that the flash was the result of a nuclear detonation. So this goes to show really how important verification is. I mean, we would absolutely want to know when a nuclear test is being conducted, and if it's been conducted in a clandestine or secret fashion, we want to have a means of actually detecting those kinds of tests so that countries can't do this kind of thing. And of course, that's an important bridge to the role of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty currently in arms control. Okay, so we're pretty much done. This video, I hope, has helped you with the ability to grapple with the scale and scope of nuclear weapons testing from 1945 to today. Okay, so that's the record. What this video doesn't talk about, of course, is why. Why do you test? And the reality is there's a lot of technical reasons why you might want to conduct a nuclear test, and there's a lot of political reasons that you might want to conduct a nuclear test. And we're going to explore those together in class. I hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you again soon.